Texts explore complex topics, but their patterns of organization are usually simple. If anything, the simpler the pattern of organization, the easier it is for the reader to focus on the complex ideas. And we can call patterns of organization frameworks. It's this idea of like, what do I say first? What do I say next? What do I say last? An analogy for a framework is like a recipe, right? You've got all this material you need to work with, and so to make things less chaotic, you follow a framework, right? Well, first I'm going to boil the noodles, you know, then I'm going to make the sauce. And that's how, on a TV show like Chopped, if you're not familiar with this show, they surprise these professional chefs with some mystery ingredients, and then they have a very short amount of time to make something tasty with them. And they're able to do this because they know lots of recipes. They can take something like squid and cactus and think, I'm going to make a fish taco, right? Well, I'm going to make a seafood salad with this. Um, we this is what we can do as academic writers too. You take a mess of information and you use a simple framework to organize it. So we've seen an example already. We've talked about logical division in this class, and we noticed how you can take like a 15-minute long video that's packed full of examples, and then use the same basic pattern of organization that you see in a 5-paragraph essay, and it all makes sense. You have a topic and a main idea. You put your ideas into groups like some dislikes in nature, some examples of physical attraction. That's where we see the T-shirt experiment, and so on. Then we come back to that topic and main idea. This is a good framework that we can all try to master. Another useful framework, here we see it again, and how this might have worked in our essays. Another useful framework is the experiment report. There's so many academic texts out there that basically explain an experiment that somebody did, and the experiments are all different, but the writing approach here, the framework is basically the same in all of them. There's some sort of hypothesis. That's what we wanted to study, and then we can talk about who the participants were, how we did it, what materials and methods, and then we can look at the results, talk about what's significant or meaningful about the results before kind of looking towards the future, admitting the limitations, suggestions for further research, and so on. This is useful if we're doing experiments and writing about them, but it's also useful if we're just trying to summarize someone else's experiment or write about science in general. Like, here's the hypothesis, and then we get another sentence that tells us the participants are women and men, the materials, T-shirts, and the procedure. Well, first the men slept in the shirts, and then the women smelled them. Then we get the results, some discussion of those results. What's significant about this, right? Before kind of looking forward a little bit, right? That's a couple common frameworks there, right? That experiment write-up, logical division. Here's another really common framework for academic writing. It's called they say, I say. First, we kind of explain what some other people have said before offering our response to that. Maybe we disagree, or maybe we have another example we'd like to add, or maybe what they said explains this thing that we're experiencing right now. That like so-and-so's theory of space and place explains the incident on campus from last week. All right. Whatever we do, we get a very simple structure. The introduction shows us both sides. This is what they say, and this is what I think about that. We then go over the sets of arguments one at a time. Readers can't understand your response unless they understand what it is you're responding to first, and then the conclusion kind of comes back and gives both sides of it again. It's such a popular framework that there's a first year composition textbook named after it. They say, I say. The writers basically note that without the they say part, readers sometimes just, I don't know, they don't understand why the argument exists in the first place. I mean, look at this example of someone sort of giving an argument about the TV show The Sopranos. This was for those not familiar with it, a TV show about the sort of the daily lives and psychological, drama of a group of mafiosos in New Jersey. Here, notice that the audience isn't really responding very positively to this discussion. And then what changes when you wrap this discussion in context? Some people say that The Sopranos present caricatures. I think they're complex characters. Oh, suddenly people respond differently to this because they understand why this person's talking now. This is a response to something. And it kind of draws the readers in. like they can start thinking about it themselves. So a good analogy here is like, when you're at a house party and you walk into the kitchen and then there's this conversation that's just full on underway. You need to kind of get a little bit of context before you can join in. And so if you walk in and then they pause and they tell you like, oh well, Derek here said that he thinks that Star Trek is better than Star Wars, then and we were just talking about that. Now you're prepared, and now you can like kind of listen to what everyone has to say, and then jump in and share your own thoughts on that. This is all an example of they say I say. It's really common in academic writing. So here's some other examples of it, not just in academic writing, but really just writing in general. You see this in Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. Oh well, the clergymen say that these protests are deplorable. I say the conditions are deplorable. Here's another kind of good example of it. The author starts with an anecdote where he goes to a book fair and he sees a woman with a big yellow button on her shirt that says "I'm a reader" with an exclamation point, and he uses that to give this point that a lot of people think reading books makes you interesting, and I disagree. We also see this in academic writing that follows the standard experiment report, right? So, I mean, take a look here. Here's this, an article that's part of our course reader, this multiracial facial golden ratio. It's not the easiest thing to say. This study looked at facial proportion and the golden ratio in Malaysia, right? Okay, but before they tell us about their study, we're going to first hear about what some other people have done. Like, here's what the ancient Greeks said, right? And then here's what Ricketts did this thing with a golden divider. And then turns out that other studies have looked at the Japanese Brazilians, the Indian subcontinent, and Thai. But up to this present day, there's no evidence to assess the evaluation and satisfaction of one's own facial appearance, and also to determine its association with the facial proportion in relation to the golden ratio among the Malaysian population, right? So they study these other people. We're going to study them, the Malaysian population. All examples of they say, I say. So, I mean, who are they, right? Well, it could be, okay, the previous researchers, right? But it could just be, conventional wisdom, right? A lot of people think, but, it could be one person in particular. Another writer might be something that your dad once told you. It could be a group of people. It could even just be you in the past, right? All these things can serve as a way to start this framework off. Okay, and that's what we see Kanazawa doing, right? He's got a group of people, the social scientists, right? And he's an evolutionary psychologist. So why is he giving all this time and attention to explain the social science theory? Well, it gives readers context for the argument, right? And you can see how Kanazawa's stuff about human behavior fits into this broader academic discussion. You also get a sense of why he's writing. Like like a lot of the prevailing scientific theory he thinks is wrong. That gives like a sense of urgency. It shows how what he's saying is controversial. It's part of a debate, but ultimately it draws readers in, right? They can start thinking, well, gee, what? Yeah, like I took a sociology class. What do I think about this stuff? Here's some phrases we can use to kind of try this out in our own writing. The conventional wisdom is that. There's an old saying that the average person tends to think all good ways for generalizing, or we can even just get something specific. Well, when I was younger or when I was a kid, all these things can work. Let's look at some other examples from our course reader and see some other they say I say moves that the authors have made.